So if you've ever been down the dark rabbit holes on Reddit and you've seen story after story of guys struggling with symptoms like hard flaccid, chronic pelvic pain syndrome, pelvic floor dysfunction, you know how discouraging that can be. And it's very hard to find someone who's actually recovered. But every once in a while, you'll come across a gem. And if you're watching today, I've got someone who you definitely want to meet. His name is Ben Calbitz, and you may have seen some of his posts on Reddit. And he's one of the few guys, we like to call him the GOAT on our Discord server, that actually not only took the time to come back and talk about his pelvic floor dysfunction recovery, but also go into great detail talking about exactly what steps he took, how he did it. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my new friend, Ben Calbitz. Ben, it's very nice to meet you. Thanks for joining us today.
Of course, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get to talk a little bit, especially about this. This condition is just something that's interested me my entire life, and frankly, outside of school and forums, there's not a whole lot of times that I can actually talk to someone, sort of, especially face to face. So
yes,
I'm really happy for this opportunity.
Awesome. So you mentioned school. So it's my understanding that you're in your, I think, third year of exercise science, kinesiology, and you're working toward a doctorate of physical therapy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. How much of that had to do with recovering from pelvic floor dysfunction?
Oof, pretty much all of it. Just the feeling of when I was able to recover, going from the pretty much lowest point in my life to just finally being free of that, being the person I wanted to be, being able to help myself recover just through exercise and other natural means. It's something I really wanted to be able to bring other people as well. And it doesn't just go for pelvic pain, even stuff like low back pain. Exercise can help that a ton, and that's still not fully understood by the medical world. It's just stuff like that makes me want to be a PT and want to bring these cures to the public.
Yeah, there's a lot of chronic pain out there, and there's a lot of different opinions out there as to how to resolve it. For one, I deal with excessive hypermobility and laxity in my joints, and that's been something that's plagued me for a while. So it's great to have someone that actually cares about kind of getting a handle on all the moving parts to it, and being able to help people. So Ben, walk us through your when your symptoms started, when you knew something was wrong, and were your symptoms suddenly onset? Did you see early warning signs?
So in hindsight, there were some early warning signs, but at the time, I didn't see anything. I was, for about, I'd say, 2 years leading up to my experience with getting EHF, I did have some constipation issues, very minor, hard flaccid. I'd say after having a bowel movement, I'd see a little bit of retraction and such, and it would go back to normal. Although I do have to state that I had phimosis. So the foreskin of my penis didn't fully retract. So I sort of just thought, oh, that's just, I'll have to fix that someday, go to a doctor. But for now, that's just how it is. I didn't really think much of it. As for my HF, I got it when I was around 16 years old. And I was a pretty, I would say, heavy smoker of weed. And I would smoke a lot of these cartridges, like in the pens. So none of the actual, none of the actual, the actual plant, just whatever the fuck, you pick up at high school, which probably wasn't good for you. It wasn't good for me. But either way, when I would smoke, sometimes before I'd go to bed, I would masturbate. I'm pretty sure this led to a lot of unconscious clenching beyond what would be normal for me. And I kept this up for maybe 6 months or so. One night, I orgasmed, and boom, instant HF, just complete instant onset. I was quite high, so I was sort of freaking the hell out. I immediately, since I still lived with my parents, I went over to them. I'm like, something's really wrong with my penis. I would like to go to the emergency room immediately and get this checked out. And they were like, oh my God, yeah, let's go. So we went to the emergency room. I got a Doppler ultrasound on my penis. The pretty much an hour after this happened, and I got it on my testicles as well, since I was feeling some pain there. And all results were completely normal, which was sort of a little spark in the back of my head that was leading me towards thinking this was more about musculoskeletal issues.
So immediately you kind of picked up on the fact that it was musculoskeletal. So in the experience myself and a lot of the guys that I work with on Discord, it's initially not like a spark in the back of the head, like, well, maybe it's musculoskeletal. Instead, it's, worst case thinking, I have cancer, I have permanent nerve damage, I've got some sort of neurological condition. It's going to progress worse. I'm never going to feel my penis again. I'm never going to have an orgasm. I'm never going to have a normal bowel movement. Did you go through any of that fear cycle? Or was that spark enough to kind of give you hope throughout?
I still went through a little bit of the fear cycle. I wasn't thinking rationally, of course. A lot of times when I did finally get back into thinking clearly, it's the ultrasound that really saved me from a lot of that bad thinking, that literally mere moments after I got this injury, they couldn't see anything wrong. And I was just, it basically narrowed down into my mind, okay, there's a few things that could be wrong. Muscles, nerves, or somehow I injured the penis and it's completely invisible on an ultrasound, which I found not insightful. But really, I did go through some bad thoughts, but they were not as pronounced as many other people for that reason.
I think that's fortunate for the community because you're able to kind of approach things with a clear head and provide, some of the information that you've shared out there on the interwebs. So you've talked about, that masturbation and getting high played a role. How dangerous do you feel pornography and edging are? And, do you think obviously it's kind of a foregone conclusion here, but do you think they predispose folks to pelvic floor dysfunction? And I think what I really want to ask is, you've got, if you've ever been on Reddit, you've seen all of the subs, and there's some just pretty nasty subs that are out there in terms of sexual pleasure and different things that you can do with your body. And there are folks who have basically dedicated their lives to pornography, masturbation, edging, and sexual pleasure. And they end up going into their 50s, 60s, 70s, still continuing these lifestyles, and they never get PFD. On the other hand, you have folks that have musculoskeletal imbalances and they masturbate one time wrong or do something wrong, or maybe they didn't even masturbate. Maybe it's just musculoskeletal imbalances, and they get PFD. Maybe it's from sitting too much, or maybe it's from, a fall to the tailbone or something in a car accident. So what's your over and under as far as, sexual type activity, musculoskeletal activity, and how they correlate together?
So just for a big blanket statement here, I don't believe that pornography and etching and even rough masturbation and all that kind of stuff predisposes you to HF or pelvic pain almost at all. I mean, there's an increased risk that you'll get it, but like you said, there are a lot of people that just do crazy stuff, just stuff in their pelvic region, and they get off pretty much fine. I am of the opinion that we have some sort of, be it genetic or muscular imbalance, something that puts us in a very big risk group to be receiving these kinds of pelvic pain conditions. So when you combine that risk factor with things that are already inherently bad for you, like pornography and edging, that's oftentimes going to be the catalyst for a lot of people. On its own, I do think pornography and edging are still bad. Mostly on pornography, edging's not great, but if your pelvic floor is fine, you're oftentimes going to be okay. Pornography, though, it's bad for your brain, and that's that's all.
I actually just did a recording last night with the Discord server on how to quit porn, and we covered the absolute dangers of neurological, neurochemical, neuromuscular, musculoskeletal, how pornography can actually have an adverse impact on the body, as well as the ethical concerns over the exploitation of people. I always like to be careful what I say because of the algorithms, but I think everyone knows what I'm talking about here. So, when folks get pelvic floor dysfunction, they obviously the first step is they want to go to the doctor. Like you went straight to the ER. And if I was in your position, I wouldn't blame you. I didn't initially get HF. I had intense rectal pain, the golf ball sensation, rectal spasms. I couldn't urinate properly. I couldn't defecate properly. But I was kind of like self-managing. It would like come and go over the next, several days and weeks. And so I'm not usually inclined to go to the ER just because of the costs involved. And so I was just kind of waiting to see, and I went to my doctor and I got a prostate exam and everything was fine. I got put on the antibiotics. And I followed that course of, okay, then you go here and then you go here and then you go there. And you end up going, doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist, like I mentioned in my first video. And, every doctor has a different opinion. You go to a neurologist or a urologist and they run the tests and they'll throw their hands up in the air. Then they'll say you need pelvic floor physical therapy. And the pelvic floor physical therapist will do some internal work, but it still doesn't address the root problem, which tends to be musculoskeletal imbalances, as we are clearly on the same page on. So why do you think that, medical professionals lack so much knowledge in this condition?
Well, I think there are a bunch of reasons that sort of come together to form the problem with the medical community that we're having right now. I'd say the first reason is that pelvic pain branches into many different medical fields at once. You maybe have problems with your nerves, with your muscles, and of course with your penis, with different parts of your body all at once, which tends to sort of not be as effective for a specialist to be able to understand. Say a urologist has a great understanding of the penis. I've seen a lot of talks about stupid urologists and stuff, but the fact of the matter is they know the anatomy amazingly. But then when you start to incorporate like breathing mechanics, what's going on in your legs and your core, what may be happening to the nerves and the blood vessels and the muscles at the same time, you sort of start to escape the scope of each specialist's knowledge unless they were specifically trained in the condition that they're trying to, that you're bringing forth, which they're not. HF is a relatively new condition. The second reason I think HF is so poorly understood by doctors is because of how recent it is as a condition. They were not educated on it. And frankly, a lot of the current doctors and therapists rely on methods that are starting to become outdated, especially pelvic floor physical therapists. Really, it's a combination of HF not being known, HF and pelvic pain just splitting into many different specialty fields, and just a complete lack of research. There aren't a whole lot of research efforts going on right now either, because there's not really any money in it. There's nothing to sell to somebody with HF. You can give them some treatments over time of therapy, but there's nothing in it for the medical world for them to jump on and really start putting in the hundreds or thousands of dollars that it would take to actually develop a strong knowledge of the condition.
That's so well said. We find that over specialization is a blessing and a curse. If you have a tumor in your brain, you definitely want a neurosurgeon to be working on it. But when the neurology crosses paths across different sectors of the body and the muscle and the fascia, and then you incorporate the central nervous system and diaphragmatic breathing, I think that was just so well said. And I'm hoping we can get past our network traffic issues. We've had to stop and re-record a few times. So if you see some edit, folks, that's why. Okay, so let's change gears a little bit, Ben. Let's talk about, recovery fads and recovery modalities. First, I want to talk about fads. What are some of the fads that you see? Like some of the ones that I see are like the erect towel kegels, where you're draping a towel over the penis and then trying to raise the towel, if you will, raise the bar, or stretching protocols that are hours and hours long, but that's the only treatment option that's available. And that was what I found. Like when I went to YouTube to try to find solutions to my symptoms. I saw some great, video content, some video content makers that were creating content specifically for what my doctor diagnosed me with chronic pelvic pain syndrome and pelvic floor dysfunction. But, almost each of those videos, it was talking about, either stress management, which is a key part, but also stretching protocols. And that was all that was there. And so, let's discuss what you think about the fads, and then what you think about some of the more prevalent modalities and which ones are effective and which ones, in your opinion, are not effective.
Of course. Well, first thing, something that I've noticed about a lot of these fads is they're approaching the puzzle that is HF one piece at a time. They're taking one specific piece that could fit into recovery and centering the entire strategy around it. For example, stretching. Nobody would tell you stretching is bad, but 3 hours of only stretching or something, well, that's not going to do anything. I might even put you worse off. And, like deep breathing, meditation, the IC training, there are all these bits and pieces of actual recovery work. And I think they become fads because, well, either there's not enough knowledge out there or people want something that will speed track them to recovery more than anything else. So they hyper-fix.
Yeah. Yeah, nobody wants to put in the work of taking a look at all of the different elements, and that's why in our Discord server we created the tenets of recovery, which involves the neurological, the fight or flight, mind body connection, the musculoskeletal, and the myofascial, the diet and gut bowel health and sexual health function. We try to paint a broad picture, and everyone's approach is going to vary differently depending on what's driving some of their symptoms. Some people might need to spend a lot of more time on the mind-body piece because they deal with health anxiety and chronic stress and chronic anxiety in general, while another person may have significant musculoskeletal imbalances. Maybe they're like me and they're hypermobile and they've got hyperlax joints, and so there needs to be more attention spent on the strengthening portion. And then some folks may have some inherent internal bowel issues like IBS or something. And so they have poor bowel habits and they're constantly straining, and that's predisposing them. And so, we have to take a step back and see the big picture and then treat things as a whole. And then there are times where you can zero in on specific areas to address, certain deficiencies. And for me, I know one of those was my psoas. My psoas was very short and very tight because I had basically spent about 35 years professionally in a seated position for work, and then, sitting on the commute home and then back to work. So one of the questions that I had for you too, as far as on modalities, is that I saw in some of your posts in your discussion on corrective exercises, like eccentric loading. What is that, and how did that help you recover?
So essentially what you're trying to do with eccentric loading is pretty much just what the name implies, is you're loading mainly the eccentric phase, or if you were to do a bicep curl, instead of trying to load the part where you're bringing it up, just for some of the viewers out there who need to know this, you're bringing it down with all the weight. It's a pretty widely used bit of knowledge in the fitness community. The eccentric portion of a lot of lifts will be more important for developing strength over explosive periods, but also building baseline strength. Say somebody who can't do a pull-up, a lot of ways that you can sort of get to being able to do a pull-up is by jumping up to the bar, you hold onto it, and then let yourself come down as slow as possible. You're focusing on building a foundation with eccentric training. And that's all the eccentric loading is going to be doing. And it's a lot nicer to your flexibility and to your muscles' health in general when you have chronic pelvic pain, where a lot of tension in the muscles can be an issue. Eccentric loading is creating a lot less tension than concentric loading would be. So it's essentially just a little bit more of a safe way to train, but it's not going to be making a massive difference in how you're recovering.
Yeah, basically, eccentric loading is you're loading the muscle in its lengthened position. And as a hypermobility sufferer, I know that one of the things that we need is ligamentaceous strength. One of the first things to go are the ligaments around all of my joints. I've had, golfer's elbow and tennis elbow and knee valgus issues because of my hypermobile joints, as well as a number of back issues. And I know that, isometric type and eccentric type of exercises are the safest to build that foundation, to establish that ligamentaceous strength and, kind of solidify the connective tissues. And so they're activating properly. So that's so well said. So, we're talking about exercises and eccentric loading and, what we find on Reddit and some other, communities is that they will directly discourage strengthening due to the risks involved with strengthening and aggravating pelvic floor symptoms. There are some communities on Reddit, I think it's CPPS, where they won't even allow you to talk about strengthening. And I might have a community wrong, but there are certain communities on Reddit that do not prefer to talk about strengthening exercise. They discourage against it. By the mods. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, to put it in just a short way, it's because it can make things worse. If you strengthen, then here's the big bold red lettered text. If you strengthen wrong, if you are doing it poorly, that is a risk factor. And I don't think these people, the moderators of these subreddits, want to take the risk of, providing or having someone provide strengthening routines, and then somebody gets worse off for them, which is something that I've had to sort of, I've weighed the risks in my mind, and I do believe the exercises and some of my routines are something that you can just kind of pick up and learn. That's why you're going to want to focus more on, when people come to see a lot of these HF routines, they look at it really simply, and the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, that's a strengthening routine. It's not. It's muscle activation. Yes, you're not here so that you can glute bridge 400 pounds. You're not here because you couldn't glute bridge 400 pounds. You're here because when you glute bridge, you use your hamstrings. It's a different form of training than a lot of people are anticipating that it is. And if you try and give somebody, okay, fix your pelvic pain by going to the gym and doing a standard gym routine, well, that's never going to work. That's why they don't allow that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. That's why, one of the first videos that I made on strengthening is simply just the sandwich drill, just the core activation and glute activation. And muscle activation is key to establishing that baseline. You don't want to. And I've had conversations with guys where I talk about the need for strengthening, and they're like, all right, so I just need to go, do 100 squats a day. And it's like, no, stop. Don't do that. Don't do that, please. And first of all, if you, in my experience, and this is one of the things that, my practitioner, functional movement expert, Dr. Bo Sauls, he wouldn't even give me any exercise except for banded monster walks until I could prove to him that I could do a sandwich drill where I was activating my core, 360 expansion, squeezing both glutes in front of him, and also telling him, of course, I can't demonstrate, but telling him that I was actually able to drop my pelvic floor through a gentle reverse kegel. And he says, I'm not going to give you any strengthening. And it took me 6 weeks to learn, and I had to learn that myself. I had to learn that at home by practicing breath work and relaxation techniques and reverse kegels until I was able to make that neuromuscular switch. Because he explained to me in the beginning, he goes, if I give you strengthening exercises, you're just going to make yourself worse. You're going to end up in more pain, and then it's going to take us longer to treat, your issues. And you need to learn to keep the pelvis in a neutral state when you are doing activation. And that's going to translate from neutral state during activation to neutral state during strengthening. Now, I've never been an active guy. I've never been a gym rat. But for a short season as I was recovering through pelvic floor dysfunction, as I was able to make that separation and learn to relax my pelvic floor, I was actually able for the first time to get up under a bar. And before you knew it, I was, squatting 185 pounds, deadlifting 225 pounds. I know that's not huge numbers for most folks who are in the gym, but for a guy who's never picked up a weight in his life for the most part, especially being hypermobile, that's pretty remarkable. And so to be able to go from muscle activation and isometric and eccentric loading, you can eventually progress as your symptoms decrease safely to a place where, hey, if you want to hip thrust 400 pounds, you might be able to get there at one point. But the first priority is muscle activation and doing it safely.
Yeah. Well said. I agree 100%.
So, we've kind of talked about meditation. How much emphasis did you place or would you place personally on the whole mind body side? The sympathetic fight or flight, overdrive, the adrenaline rushing, you're in a state of panic, you're in a state of angst, versus the parasympathetic, the rest and digest, the calm state that happens when you get great news or when someone, rubs on your shoulders a little bit, you kind of feel all your muscles relax.
Yeah.
What did that look like in your recovery journey?
So I am of the opinion, and there are a lot of people who need to hear this, that this part, your nervous system is so important. And if you're going to be nervous, panicking all the time, I don't think you will ever see recovery. It's not attainable. You can't expect for a chronically tense pelvic floor to become relaxed if you're not relaxed. One of the greatest reasons that I believe I was able to even begin to recover was because in the back of my mind, I always had one thought: I will recover. I never was thinking that I wouldn't, oh, my penis is irreversibly damaged. Oh, I can never fix this. No, I never thought that. Seriously. When I started recovering, those thoughts were gone from my mind. And do whatever you have to do to get those out of there. But as long as those thoughts stay, your recovery is going to be inhibited.
You're going to be stuck.
Yeah. Now it's okay to, get nervous sometimes, get really, scared, like, oh my God, just have a little panic attack. It happens to the best of us. But you want to be going through day to day, just not even thinking about your dick, about your penis. And you want to get to that rest and digest. You want to just be living your life. And if you just live your life and start your recovery, you'll get there. You'll
see results. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, flare-ups are a bittersweet thing. And I didn't realize this, of course, hindsight's 2020. But flare-ups, eventually once I was able to calm myself down, once I was able to recognize that this was in fact a musculoskeletal condition, and that it was not neurological, it was not a tumor, and that it was something that was recoverable. And I actually learned that when I started having a little bit of deep tissue work by Dr. Bo, when he taught me how to release my psoas at home, and when I would lay on a psoas tool. Now, I don't recommend everybody just goes and buys a psoas tool, because psoas might not be your problem. But when I would personally lay on a psoas tool, I actually felt pain. My rectal pain would immediately go away only while I was on the psoas tool. And it didn't matter which side. And I was like, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. This has to be musculoskeletal. There has to be some sort of nerve compression happening somewhere in the nether regions that's recovering. And so once I started to recover and I had a little bit more peace, I would get flare-ups. Now, I would get flare-ups before I knew this, and they were like doomsday all over again. Complete panic, very dark thinking, very fatalistic thinking. But once I was able to put myself at peace, there were more annoyances, but they went beyond annoyance. They actually became diagnostic in nature. I was able to realize I did this activity and it flared my symptoms. What was it about this activity that flared my symptoms? Is it representative of a weak muscular system that I need to strengthen? Is it an area that I overdid it? And so how can I change my approach the next time I do that activity? And I learned a lot. about sitting, about moving, about running, about moving laterally. Sometimes lateral movements, jumping back and forth from side to side would actually trigger my symptoms. And so I realized that I had some weaknesses in the adductors and that my glute medials weren't as strong as they needed to be. So, they were bittersweet. They were terrible and painful sometimes, ranging on a scale from, mildly annoying to sometimes debilitating, but they were helpful in the sense that they helped me identify, what I had still left to work on. And so I love how you said, it's okay to have a panic attack. It's okay to have, a little bit of anxiety, but move on with your day and get on with the hope that you can and still recover.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Once again, well said. I had a similar sort of another light bulb moment. This was a little further down the line from when I actually got HF, but I had a lot of problems in my adductors. So specific groin release, so stretches, would make my symptoms just vanish. They're gone. And that's another one of those things that's like, oh yeah, this is clearly a musculoskeletal issue. It's just what kind of nerve damage would go away when I move my legs? When I stretch my muscles? I can't think of any. What kind of injury would go away? I can't think of any. It would also happen when I would urinate. A lot of my symptoms would go away as I urinate. And that happens with a lot of people, but not all of them. But it does help sort of to have these mental blocks removed by seeing these things.
Yep. So do you experience flare-ups, and are you maintaining strengthening protocols? One of the most prominent questions we get is, if you cure this, do you think your symptoms can come back?
So that is, first of all, no flare-ups, just nothing. I can work out, I can deadlift, nothing. It's pretty much gone from my life. But the question of would it come back is, I don't know. I would hope not, but I can't in good conscience say no, it will never come back, because I don't know that. But I can say without a shadow of a doubt that if it came back, I would know how to fix it again. So I'm not so worried. It's awesome. That's a great answer. It's not something that scares me. Yeah. A lot of guys are terrified by the fact as they begin to see recovery and they see flare-ups coming, and then they make more progress and they're doing really good. And then all of a sudden they have the thought, can this come back? And it's like, and they ask me, Keith, is this ever going to come back? Is it going to come back? And I'm like, I don't know. If you maintain a healthy lifestyle, the chances are a whole lot lower. But if you sink back into the old habits of, being sedentary and not taking care of yourself, and, having poor practices as far as your bowels, and, you get back into, some of the things that, might have helped contribute towards your PFD, like, excessive pornography and masturbation, it's very possible that symptoms may come back. Yeah.
Ben, before I move on to some of our other community questions, I've got some specific ones that the community asked that I ask you. I just want to get, if you had a minute or two to just tell someone who is in the throes of pain and fear and doubt and disfigurement from pelvic floor dysfunction, hard flaccid, what would you say to them?
You can get better. There is a way out. Just research it. Focus on what you need to improve. Look for any flaws you can find in your own body, in your mechanics, in your lifestyle, and fix it. Don't get caught up in a spiral, a downward emotional spiral. Get caught up in an upwards emotional spiral. Use this experience to lift up your life, to make it better than it was before you had pelvic pain.
Truly excellent. I've always said on the server and in my channel that suffering always has a purpose. And I can look back, now at what I went through, and as painful as it was, the dark thoughts that I had even about, my own life at the time, and how I wouldn't wish it on anyone else in the world. I am very thankful I had those experiences, because now my life has a completely different purpose and direction in creating content that promotes and, fosters hope for those who are suffering. And I'm very thankful I had it. And if I could flip a switch and never have had it, I would never flip that switch. I wouldn't even come close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something that boggles a lot of people's minds when I say it. If I could have this exact thing happen, if I could get HF again, not like nowadays, but back then, it changed my life for the better. If I didn't get HS, I would be sitting down in the basement somewhere, smoking pot with no real future and no idea what I want to do when I grow up. And now I'm, here I'm relatively physically fit and I have a purpose in mind. I have goals. It gave me all of that. Suffering builds character.
Yes.
You'll see that everywhere, but it's true.
It is very true. Okay, so here's one of the questions from our Discord community, Ben. They want to know what your take is on symptoms that resemble venous leak. Venous leak tends to be a big fear with a lot of guys because, as you go down and you doom scroll on Reddit while you're trying to research, it's hard not to come across someone that says, hey, I've got venous leak and it's irreversible and, there's nothing that can be done. Or, what do you think about venous leak? Do most people with pelvic floor dysfunction have venous leak, or is it very rare? What are your thoughts?
So first off, I can say it's really rare. Just that's a statistic that, is factual. But then going to the less factual side and more of my opinion, I think that venous leak in itself is something that comes around when you are of progressing age, very progressing, or you are extremely overweight or have some other genetic dysfunction that isn't related to pelvic floor dysfunction. You see, a lot of times in pelvic floor dysfunction, the IC muscle is not working as intended. And one of the major functions of the IC muscle is that it's literally going to be clamping down on the blood vessels that push blood into your penis, and it clamps down to hold some of that blood and reduce the rate that it's leaving, which will leave you with an erection. It'll leave your penis high. And when these muscles are not working properly, they're simply not going to clamp to full capacity, which in simple terms will cause pretty much exactly what a venous leak does. The only difference is that it's completely muscular based. So you can go and get a Doppler to check it out. You can go get tested, and I can almost, I've seen a ton of people get this test before. They go in like, oh, I definitely have venous leak. They get tested. It's like, what? I'm totally fine. That's more than likely the situation that most of the people here are in. I'm not going to discount it completely. It could be a thing that you're going through, but for most people, it's just happens to be a symptom that mirrors venous leak.
Yeah.
Symptom on pelvic pain.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably why the IC muscle training thing is an emerging thing that we see and kind of faddish. And one of the things that I've encouraged one of the guys that I was talking to earlier is that if it's not venous leak and if there's a hyperfixation on fixing just the IC muscle, and we're looking at again focusing on isolating certain muscles, and I may have told this story before, but my wife is a medical massage therapist, and she has a certification in an exercise specialization. She can program exercises for folks. And as part of her training, she was required to go to a mortuary training center of sorts where they had cadavers, not live, dead, preserved human bodies that were, dissected and segmented in certain ways so that they could explore, physically touch the muscles with gloves on, understand where the fascias were, where the fascia was, where the veins were, where the nerves were, and the arteries, and they could explore these areas and understand how they, biomechanically would come together and work. And when they were on the pelvis, the trainer said to my wife, he said, we used to think that these muscles here in the pelvic floor worked independently. But what we learned over the last, 100 years is that they actually work more together as a group. They work as a unit in conjunction with the antagonist muscles being the muscles outside of the pelvic floor, the glute medius, the glute max, the spinal erectors, the hamstrings, the hip flexors, the psoas, the transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis, all of the muscles on the outside play a role in conjunction with the muscles on the inside, even though they're not all directly, connected together. They're connected to the same bones, and the fascia is connected to them. And so they all work as a unit. And I think that's one of the reasons why folks tend to hyperfixate on the IC muscle, is because they think that that's the problem. But the problem generally is the entire group of muscles has dysfunction somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. And, a very good way to look at it is a lot of these people doing IC training, they want to, and, to no fault of their own, they want to regain some of the capacity, have fuller erections and have better erection quality, all that kind of stuff. And to an extent, I do think that IC training can, there is a limit to what it can do, and you've got to be quite careful with how you do it, but it can help. Although, to the people who do that, I would like to say that if you've ever been, say, masturbating and you feel your body clench, you tense up your body, a lot of people do this sort of not even just a Kegel, but they'll clench their glutes, they'll clench their quads, they'll clench all these muscles just to keep blood in the penis. And, it will create a firmer erection and a stronger one. But there are two things to think about here. The first is, if you're tensing all of these muscles and it's putting more blood into the penis, that means they're all helping with that, which means the IC training that you're focusing on is already at a disadvantage to a more full body approach, just from experiences you can already test yourself. The IC is just a piece of that puzzle. But when it comes to those full body Kegels, needing to tense all these muscles up just to achieve orgasm, or just to edge or masturbate or whatever you're doing, is just incredibly unhealthy. Not only are you stressing your pelvic floor, you're stressing everything, all at once. And that's something that got a lot of us into this in the first place. My opinion, I didn't use any IC training. I didn't use any, I've seen some people talk about Kegel training. Just stay away. Unless you are in a situation where you need to use that, your use case is different, just stay away from it.
Well said. We talk a lot about, the dangers of Kegels, and, and I like to caveat the dangers of Kegels with the fact that Kegeling is a natural biological process of the male and female body, and it serves a purpose, and it's, different for each gender. But, for the male body, Kegeling happens daily whenever you're using the restroom. You're Kegeling as you're finishing up urination or finishing up defecation. During orgasm, Kegeling is going to happen, subconsciously. It's going to happen automatically. And so Kegels themselves aren't necessarily dangerous. It's the habit of constantly Kegeling, or Kegeling is a form of training, and especially the method by which you so well described is incorporating all of the other muscles, inside and outside of the pelvic floor. Next question from the community. What is Ben's take on soft and cold glands, erectile dysfunction, penile numbness associated with this condition? I think we touched on it a lot, but I think there's probably a take that you can have that might be able to best answer this question.
So there are limits to my knowledge in the symptoms range. These would be some that I might just have to generalize into fascial constrictions in the penis, or blood flow not reaching different parts of the penis. Generally, though, cold glands and soft glands, it's just the blood is not adequately getting there. If you can touch a part of your penis and it is physically cold, which I did go through, it's not just the nerves saying, oh, this feels cold, but when I touch it, it isn't. If it's literally cold, that's just not enough blood flow getting to the area. Whether that's through muscles in the pelvic floor constricting, or through fascia itself constricting, something's constricting. All of these symptoms originate from similar points. They're just different expressions of the same issue in your body. So it's best not to focus too hard on specific symptoms unless something you do in specific flares that symptom up. So then you can sort of root out its main cause, I guess you could say.
All right, and last question from the community. Someone read that you mentioned that swimming is the most important or an important exercise, or it's the fastest cure for pelvic pain, hard flaccid. Why is that? Have you personally tried it, or do you know someone who was cured by swimming or swimming alone?
So I'll just get this out of the way. Swimming alone, not going to cure you. No chance of that. So whoever may be questioning that, you're going to need more than swimming. But I have personally tried swimming. I did it for a lot of my recovery period. I used it as my main form of cardio as well as walking. I would say that it's quite a beneficial exercise to anybody with chronic pain of any kind, really, but especially pelvic pain. And just going into the reasons of that, just quickly, a lot of issues that come with pelvic pain have to do with your mechanics, either breathing or putting too much load on the pelvic floor itself. Like if you were to do a squat or try to perfect a squat, there's a very high chance that somewhere you're doing it either by not bracing properly or not dropping your pelvic floor, or just one of the many ways you could do a squat incorrectly. You're probably doing one of those. For swimming, you're taking a lot of this out of the equation. You're always breathing well, since you will drown if you don't. You are always, you're not having this load placed on your pelvic floor since you are floating in the water. So you're much more free to target the muscles as you would see fit as you do the motion. And stuff like breaststroke is just good for the posterior chain of your body. It's good for your legs. It's movement that does not have as many negative effects as something with a barbell. So it's automatically good. But to say it's the best or the most important or the fastest is, I wouldn't say that.
Great answer. That's all the questions we have, Ben. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the community or the viewers on YouTube?
I guess I did forget to answer one part of a question. I am still continuing a strengthening protocol, so I do still stay physically active. But to those wondering, it is not in any way, and it hasn't for many years since I've recovered, been a routine that is focused around pelvic pain recovery. It's just standard. I've been doing standard strengthening routines, just gym work. So I wanted to get that out there in case anybody was wondering. I just have a regular exercise protocol. I don't really do any maintenance of pelvic pain stuff in particular.
Yeah, that actually, I do have another question. While you were going through recovery, your protocol, what did it look like and how long did it last?
So it was a little bit overkill. I was in the midst of the pandemic and I was also on summer break. So I had absolutely nothing to do all day. I would often go out to swim for an hour to an hour, 30 minutes, 4 to 5 times a week. I would always go outside and like 30 minutes a day, I would just go for a walk. But the whole time I'd walk, I would focus on how I was activating different muscles. And I remember this vividly. Every time I would get back home from a walk, I would think, how can I walk better the next time? It was a little bit obsessive, but I didn't have much else to do. So I did a lot of just basic cardio with the walking, with the swimming, and then I did supplement that with a basic stretching routine. It was just one I found off of YouTube. There was nothing particularly special about it. And I did some basic strengthening exercises as well as some glute bridges and other core activation stuff, sometimes breathing, sometimes there's a specific type of plank that I like to do. It's called a Copenhagen plank. If you can look it up if you don't know about it. But just a multitude of body weight exercises that would focus a little bit on strengthening and a little bit on fixing imbalances and a little bit on just coordinating my body and learning how to use it better. I don't it was the most efficient way of going about recovery, but I almost brute forced it by doing just a lot of stuff that was really good for me in a short period of time.
Yeah, that kind of your approach reminds me of a fitness rehabilitation, and I wish I could remember the name of it. right now, but it's very unique and it's very unorthodox. But basically, this licensed physical therapist, she encourages her patients to almost the way I would describe it is they crawl around on the floor in different positions like a toddler would. And the theory is that, we tend to get, we tend to get very rigid in our functional movement. We roll out of the bed on our side. We stand straight up. We walk over to the coffee pot. We grab the coffee. We pour it. We go and we sit directly down on the chair. There's not a lot of lateral movement. There's not a lot of movement across the horizontal plane or diagonally. And so your approach to therapy, it seemed like it was varied enough where you were diagnostically assessing what parts of the body were weak, just using body weight, not being under a 185-pound barbell. And so I think that there's some validity to the variety in your approach and how effective it was for you. Plus, being bored, having nothing else to do, I can understand that. So,
yeah. Also, I was 16, so it's not like I was,
wow,
really, and it was very, very recent that I got HF. Now, the first 3 months that I had HF or so, I didn't really do much about it. So I could have gotten on it sooner, yeah. But I was relatively quick to get to it. I was young. There are a lot of things going for me that would help me recover faster. I do think my case is a little bit of an anomaly in that department, but I don't think it would restrict, even having this for 5, 10 years. Yes, it's going to be harder to dig yourself out of the hole, but you can still dig yourself out of the hole. If you're trying to get up the staircase that is finishing, just recovering, just because somebody starts halfway up it, doesn't mean you can't climb all the way up as well. I've seen some people get worried about that kind of stuff, so I'm just trying to put that at ease. I recovered quick. Not everyone's going to recover.
But yeah, I would agree. I didn't have it for a terribly long time, but I was 43 years old at the time and very weak and very sedentary, and I was able to dig myself out of the hole, with some efforts. And so anyone who's watching, who's been in the hole for a while, or perhaps you're older, it is not impossible. I know many men who are in their 90s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. One of them, general contractors, and they're out there lifting things and moving things and running bulldozers and then getting out there and manually moving rocks. And so, you can move. Movement is medicine, and there is hope for recovery. Ben, I just want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. It's just a pleasure getting to know you. It's a pleasure hearing your story and hearing your expertise in your own personal journey. Looking forward to seeing you graduating from school and getting that doctorate of PT, and so you can continue to spread the truth about pelvic floor dysfunction, about chronic pain, joint issues, musculoskeletal issues with your patients as you move forward in life, man. Thanks again for joining the video.